And people who don't respect you won't be convinced by one. So the question is no longer, how do I make them see my worth? But why am I trying to be seen by someone who has already chosen blindness? You stop over-explaining how you feel to people who consistently dismiss it. You adjust your availability, your effort, your expectations. What makes this so disruptive to unhealthy dynamics is that emotional independence removes leverage. Guilt loses its grip. Fear loses its volume. Hope stops being used against you. You no longer cling to the idea that if you're patient enough, understanding enough, or loving enough, someone will finally change. You accept reality without needing to punish it. This is where dignity quietly takes the lead. You don't need to win arguments to feel secure. You don't need closure from someone who couldn't offer consistency. You don't need reassurance every time the ground feels uncertain. You learn to reassure yourself. For those who benefited from your emotional dependence, this change feels like rejection, even if you haven't rejected them at all. All you did was reclaim yourself. But to someone who was used to having influence over your emotions, that feels like loss of control. And loss of control often reveals itself as irritation, criticism, or attempt to pull you back into the old dynamic. You might notice subtle tests, a sudden withdrawal of affection, a vague comment meant to provoke insecurity, a reminder of how things used to be. Emotional independence allows you to see these for what they are, without reacting impulsively. You don't chase reassurance. You don't overcorrect. You stay steady. And steadiness is powerful. It sends a message without saying a word. I am connected, but I am not captive. That message shifts everything. It forces relationships to either mature or dissolve. There is no middle ground anymore. Most importantly, emotional independence brings you back into alignment with yourself. Your decisions become cleaner. Your boundaries become easier. Your peace stops being conditional. You begin to choose relationships not out of fear of being alone, but out of genuine connection and mutual respect. This is why emotional independence isn't about distancing yourself from people. It's about removing the unhealthy dependency that kept you stuck. It's about standing in your own emotional space so no one else can rearrange it for their convenience. And once you do that, the power balance changes permanently. There is a particular strength in not reacting, and it's often misunderstood as indifference or weakness. In reality, it's one of the clearest signs of self-mastery. When you no longer rise to every provocation, when you stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you, you reclaim control over your emotional space. And that control is deeply unsettling to those who rely on your reactions to feel powerful. Provocation is rarely accidental. It shows up as subtle comments, delayed responses, passive-aggressive remarks, or sudden changes in tone. Its purpose isn't communication, it's activation. It's designed to pull you into defending yourself, justifying your feelings, or questioning your worth. The moment you react impulsively, the dynamic shifts. The focus moves away from the behavior and onto your response. And that's exactly where manipulators want it. When you stop reacting, you break that cycle. You pause, you breathe, you observe what's happening instead of becoming it. You don't rush to correct assumptions or clarify intentions that were never genuinely questioned. You recognize that not every misunderstanding deserves your energy, and not every comment requires a reply. This doesn't mean you suppress your emotions. It means you choose where and how to express them. You process privately before responding publicly. You decide whether engagement will bring clarity or simply feed the pattern. Emotional maturity is knowing the difference. People who don't value you often expect access to your emotional reactions. They anticipate your explanations, your frustration, your attempts to restore harmony. When those reactions don't come, it creates a vacuum. Silence replaces drama. Calm replaces chaos. And in that stillness, the manipulation has nowhere to land. There is also a powerful message in choosing not to defend your worth. Defense implies doubt. It suggests that your value needs confirmation. But when you're grounded in self-respect, you don't argue with dismissiveness. You don't plead for fairness. You don't negotiate basic respect. You simply notice and adjust. Non-reaction is not avoidance, it's discernment. You're not ignoring reality. You're refusing to participate in dynamics that drain you. You're saying, without words, I see what this is and I choose not to engage. That choice protects your energy and preserves your clarity. This shift often changes how others behave around you. Some will escalate, trying harder to provoke the response they're used to. Others will pull back, realizing the old tactics no longer work. And a few will adjust, learning to communicate more directly and respectfully because the games have stopped paying off. Remaining calm doesn't mean remaining passive. There are moments when a clear, firm response is necessary. The difference is that your response comes from intention, not impulse. You speak when it matters, not when you're baited. And when you do speak, your words carry weight because they're not diluted by emotional overreaction. Non-reaction also strengthens your internal trust. Each time you choose composure over chaos, you reinforce the belief that you can handle discomfort without losing yourself. You don't need to be loud to be strong. You don't need to win every exchange to protect your dignity. You learn that your peace is not fragile, it's resilient. For people who thrive on emotional turbulence, this is deeply frustrating. They may label you as cold, distant, or unresponsive, but those labels are projections of their own unmet need for control. You don't need to correct them. Your calm is explanation enough, and something subtle begins to happen within you. You stop replaying conversations in your mind. You stop rehearse what you should have said. You stop carrying the emotional residue of every interaction. Your mind becomes quieter. Your reactions become fewer. Your sense of self becomes more stable. This calm is not emotional shutdown, it's emotional regulation. You still feel deeply, but your feelings no longer hijack your behavior. You give yourself time to respond thoughtfully, or you choose not to respond at all. Either way, the decision is yours. In a world that rewards impulsivity and emotional spectacle, choosing non-reaction is a radical act of self-respect. It signals that your energy is valuable and your attention is selective. You don't engage to prove a point. You engage when there is meaning, and in that restraint, you gain something far more powerful than the satisfaction of winning an argument. You gain authority over yourself. And that authority changes everything. There comes a moment when you realize that reacting has been costing you more than staying silent ever could. Not reacting doesn't mean you didn't feel the sting. It means you decided that your peace mattered more than winning a momentary exchange. And that decision marks a turning point. Because the people who don't value you often depend on your reactions to keep the dynamic alive. Provocation is rarely obvious. It hides in sarcasm, in delayed replies, in selective attention, in comments that seem harmless but leave a mark. Its purpose is not dialogue, it's disruption. It pulls you out of your center and explanation mode. Suddenly, you're defending intentions you never meant to justify, emotions you never owed, boundaries you already had the right to set. The trap is subtle. Once you react emotionally, the focus shifts. The original behavior fades into the background, and your response becomes the problem. You're now too sensitive, overreacting, or misunderstanding things. And the more you try to clarify, the deeper you're pulled into a conversation that was never about understanding in the first place. Choosing not to react interrupts this pattern completely. You pause instead of pouncing. You let the moment pass without filling it with words. You recognize that some comments are invitations to chaos, not conversation, and you decline them quietly. This kind of restraint feels uncomfortable at first, especially if you're used to explaining yourself or smoothing things over. Silence can feel like surrender, but it isn't. It's strategy. It's discernment. It's knowing that not every battle deserves your energy, and not every misunderstanding deserves correction. People who don't value you often expect emotional access. They anticipate your frustration, your justifications, your attempts to repair the connection. When that reaction doesn't arrive, it creates confusion. The script changes, the power shifts. Because without your emotional response, their provocation loses its effect. Non-reaction doesn't mean passivity. It means you choose the timing and the tone of your responses. You respond when there is mutual respect, not when there is bait. You speak when clarity is possible, not when emotions are being used as leverage. This level of control is deeply unsettling to those who rely on emotional volatility to feel dominant. There is also something powerful about refusing to defend your worth. Defense suggests uncertainty. It implies that your value is something that needs approval. But when you're grounded in self-respect, you don't argue with disrespect. You observe it. An observation, followed by adjustment, is far more effective than confrontation. Adjustment can look like distance, less availability, shorter responses, fewer explanations. You don't announce these changes. You simply make them, and people notice. They may test you, escalating their behavior to provoke a response. This is often the moment when staying calm matters most. Reacting then would only confirm that the old buttons still work. Remaining calm doesn't mean remaining silent forever. It means choosing your words with intention. When you do speak, your voice is steady, not defensive. Your message is clear, not emotional. And because you don't speak often, your words carry weight. This practice strengthens something essential inside you. Each time you choose not to react, you reinforce trust in yourself. You prove that discomfort won't destroy you. You learn that you don't need to express every feeling immediately for it to be valid. You can feel deeply without broadcasting it. For people who thrive on emotional reactions, this calm feels threatening. They may interpret it as coldness, arrogance, or withdrawal. But these interpretations are irrelevant. You're not responsible for how others explain your boundaries to themselves. You're responsible for maintaining your inner balance over time. Something shifts internally. You stop replaying conversations. You stop fantasizing about the perfect comeback. You stop carrying emotional residue from interactions that no longer matter. Your mind grows quieter. Your nervous system steadies. You become less reactive not because you care less, but because you respect yourself more. This calm is not numbness. It's regulation. You still feel anger, disappointment, sadness, but they don't dictate your behavior. You give yourself space to process before responding, or you decide that no response is the healthiest one. Either way, you remain in control. In a world that often rewards emotional outbursts and constant engagement, choosing not to react is a radical act of self-respect. It sends a clear message. Your energy is valuable, and access to it is not automatic. You don't need to explain this. Your behavior already does. And when you stop reacting, you stop feeding what was never meant to nourish you. Prioritizing yourself has a way of exposing hidden expectations. The moment you stop putting yourself last, some people become uncomfortable, confused, even offended, not because you've done something wrong, but because you've changed the rules of access. When your needs were optional, everything felt smooth. When you decide they matter, the imbalance becomes visible. For a long time, you may have believed that being available, flexible, and understanding was the price of connection. You learn to adjust, to postpone your own needs, to tolerate small discomforts in the name of peace. And slowly, without noticing, your well-being became secondary. What began as kindness turned into self-neglect, dressed up as loyalty. Prioritizing yourself unapologetically is not about becoming selfish. It's about becoming honest. Honest about your limits. Honest about your energy. Honest about what you can give without losing yourself. And honesty often disrupts dynamics that depended on your silence. When you start choosing rest over exhaustion, clarity over confusion, and respect over approval, people notice. Some will adapt, meeting you where you are with maturity. Others will resist, because your self-prioritization removes the convenience they benefited from. The resistance is not proof that you're wrong. It's evidence that the dynamic was unbalanced. There is a subtle fear that surfaces when you begin to prioritize yourself, the fear of being misunderstood. You worry that people will think you've changed, that you're distant, that you're no longer the person they knew. And they're right, you've changed. You've stopped abandoning yourself to maintain comfort for others, choosing yours. LF means your needs are no longer negotiable. You stop waiting until you're depleted to rest. You stop explaining why you're tired. You stop asking permission to take up space in your own life. And this shift doesn't require confrontation. It happens quietly, through consistent choices. You may begin to say no more often. You may leave earlier. You may respond slower, not out of indifference, but out of respect for your own capacity. These small decisions accumulate, forming a boundary that protects your mental and emotional health. People who don't value you often interpret your self-prioritization as rejection. They may guilt you with phrases like you've changed or you're not as available as before. But availability is not a measure of worth. Presence is. And you can't be present when you're constantly drained, unapologetic. Self-prioritization also means you stop negotiating basic respect. You don't accept last-minute plans that disregard your time. You don't tolerate dismissive behavior because you're afraid of conflict. You don't stay in situations that consistently leave you feeling small. These choices don't make you difficult, they make you aligned. There's also a sense of grief that can accompany this change. You realize how long you've postponed yourself, how often you silence your needs to avoid discomfort. Allow yourself to feel that sadness without turning it into self-judgment. Growth often includes mourning the version of you that didn't know better. As you prioritize yourself, your standards shift. Naturally, you begin to choose relationships that feel mutual rather than exhausting. You recognize the difference between effort and overcompensation. You stop chasing connections that require you to shrink. This isn't arrogance, it's clarity. What's interesting is that self-prioritization doesn't isolate you, it filters your world. The people who remain are those who respect your boundaries, not because you demanded it, but because you modeled it. And those who leave were often only connected to the version of you that overextended. There is strength in choosing yourself without drama, without speeches, without justification. You don't need to announce your bound. Aries, you live them. You don't need to explain your priorities, you honor them. Over time, this consistency becomes your identity, and something settles inside you. A quiet confidence. You trust your decisions more. You feel less resentful. You stop giving from emptiness. Your energy becomes cleaner, more intentional. You're no longer surviving your life, you're participating in it. People who don't value you may never understand this shift. They may call it selfishness, distance, or indifference. Let them. Your responsibility is not to be understood by everyone. It's to be at peace with yourself. Because when you finally prioritize yourself unapologetically, you stop asking the world for permission to exist as you are. Detachment is often mistaken for coldness, but real detachment has nothing to do with shutting down your heart. It's about loosening the grip of expectation. It's the moment you stop needing things to unfold a certain way in order to feel okay. And when it happens without drama, without accusations or emotional explosions, it becomes one of the most powerful shifts you can make. For a long time, you may have believed that if something mattered, it deserved intensity, that if you cared, you had to fight, explain, insist, or demand answers. But intensity doesn't guarantee depth. Often, it just creates noise. Detachment, on the other hand, creates space, and space reveals truth. Detaching without drama means you don't chase explanations from people who are unwell. Ling to give clarity. You don't demand closure from those who avoided responsibility. You don't force conversations just to soothe your anxiety. You accept what is being shown to you, not what you hoped would appear. This kind of detachment doesn't happen overnight. It begins when you notice the emotional cost of staying connected to certain dynamics. The constant overthinking, the tightness in your chest, the feeling of waiting for a message, for a change, for an effort that never quite arrives. At some point, the body understands what the mind has been rationalizing away. Detachment is listening to that signal and responding with respect, not with anger, not with punishment, but with distance. You stop pushing. You stop pulling. You let the relationship stand on its own legs without you holding it up. Emotionally, people who don't value you are often unsettled by this. They're used to reactions, used to explanation, used to emotional negotiations. When those disappear, they're left with the reality of their own behavior. And reality, unbuffered by your effort, can be uncomfortable. Detachment without drama also protects your dignity. You don't live in a storm of words you might later regret. You don't try to make the other person feel the pain you felt. You don't seek revenge disguised as honesty. You simply step back, quietly, cleanly. This doesn't mean you deny your emotions. You feel them fully but privately. You process, reflect, and release without making someone else. At the center of that process, you understand that not everyone who hurts you deserves a front row seat to your healing. One of the hardest parts of detachment is letting go of potential. Letting go of who someone could be, might be, or promise to become. Potential keeps you emotionally invested long after reality has spoken. Detachment asks you to accept what is, not what could be if you tried harder. There's a subtle maturity in realizing that you don't need to be chosen by everyone, that not every bond needs to be repaired, that walking away can be an act of self-respect, not failure. Detachment reframes living as alignment, not loss. Without drama, detachment becomes invisible strength. Outsiders may not even notice the shift, but internally, something fundamental changes. You stop centering your emotional life around someone else's availability. You stop waiting for validation that never arrives. You reclaim your focus. This is where peace begins to replace anxiety. Not the absence of sadness, but the absence of chaos. You no longer replay conversations in your mind, wondering what you could have said differently. You no longer check for signs that something might improve. You accept the present as information. People who benefited from your emotional attachment may try to re-engage once they feel the distance. A message, a memory, a sudden interest. Detachment allows you to respond with clarity instead of impulse. You don't rush back to familiarity. You ask yourself, the reconnecting would honor your growth or undo it. And sometimes, detachment means staying emotionally distant, even if physical or social contact continues. You interact politely, calmly, without expectation. You stop investing emotionally where reciprocity is absent. This quiet withdrawal is often more effective than any confrontation. Detachment without drama doesn't burn bridges, it simply stops crossing them alone. It doesn't close doors, it stops knocking where no one answers. And in doing so, it preserves your self-respect. You don't need to make noise to leave a place that no longer feels safe for your heart. Silence, when chosen consciously, can be an act of profound self-care, because the moment you detach without drama, you stop bleeding in places that were never meant to heal you. Seeking validation is one of the most invisible traps we fall into. It doesn't always look like insecurity. Sometimes it looks like overachievement, people-pleasing, constant availability, or explaining yourself one more time just in case this time you'll be understood. The need for validation hides behind effort, and when you're not aware of it, it quietly hands your self-worth to someone else. At first, validation feels comforting. A message, a compliment, a sign of approval can lift your mood instantly. But the relief never lasts. Soon, you need another sign, another confirmation, another signal that you're still enough. And when that confirmation doesn't come, doubt takes its place. You start questioning your value not because it disappeared, but because you outsourced it. People who don't value you often sense this hunger, even if they don't name it. They learn, consciously or not, that a little approval keeps you engaged. A small gesture keeps you hopeful. And hope, when it depends on someone else's recognition, becomes a tool of control. Stopping the search for validation doesn't mean you stop caring about connection or feedback. It means you stop needing external approval to feel secure in who you are. You stop asking others to confirm what you should already know. And when you do that, the dynamic shifts immediately. You begin to notice how often you are adjusting yourself for acceptance, softening opinions, ignoring discomfort, staying quiet when something didn't feel right. Validation was the reward for self-erasure. Once you see that, it becomes harder to unsee. Releasing the need for validation is uncomfortable at first. There's a moment of emptiness where approval used to live. Silence feels louder. Uncertainty feels sharper. But this is not loss, it's space. Space for self-trust to grow. Self-approval is not arrogance, it's alignment. It's knowing your values, your limits, and your worth without needing an audience to confirm them. When you approve of yourself, you stop negotiating your dignity for acceptance. You don't bend to be liked. You don't perform to be chosen. This is deeply unsettling to people who benefited from your need for validation. They may notice that their opinions no longer carry the same weight, that their praise no longer controls your mood, that their withdrawal no longer destabilizes you. And without that leverage, their influence fades. You start making decisions based on internal clarity rather than external reaction. You choose what feels right instead of what will be well received. You stop overthinking how you're perceived and start focusing on how you're living. This shift brings a quiet confidence that doesn't need to announce itself. Letting go of validation also changes how you receive criticism. You no longer crumble or overdefend. You listen, evaluate, and decide what's useful, Feedback becomes information, not a verdict on your worth. And when criticism is unfair or dismissive, it loses its power to define you. You also stop chasing emotional reassurance. You don't need constant proof that someone cares. You observe actions instead of decoding mixed signals. You trust yourself enough to walk away when consistency is missing, without needing an explanation. That validates your pain. There is freedom in no longer needing to be chosen. You realize that being wanted by someone who doesn't value you is not a victory, it's a compromise. You'd rather be aligned with yourself than approved by someone else. This doesn't make you closed off. It makes you selective. You still appreciate recognition, but you don't depend on it. You still enjoy connection, but you don't lose yourself in it. Your worth remains steady, regardless of who acknowledges it. As validation loses its grip, your energy shifts. You stop trying to prove yourself. You stop explaining your choices. You stop waiting for permission to be who you are. And in that stillness, something solid forms. People may notice the change, but struggle to name it. You're calmer, less reactive, less eager to impress. And that calm is unsettling to those who once held influence over your self-esteem, because when validation no longer controls you, manipulation has nothing to work with. And that is when you finally become free.